Welcome back, friends. I am Dr. Mlelwa from University of Health and Allied Science, and in today's session we are continuing with our topic of gaseous exchange and respiration. Today we are going to discuss about the adaptation of oxygen uptake, and in this part we will go to discuss about 3 types of adaptation. First is about the mammalian fetus, then second is about the mountain climbers, and lastly is about the divers. So all of these parts, they are frequently asked in the exams and they are direct questions, so if you understand them, it will be very easy for you to perform well in your exams and hence to perform well your last exam. Now, mammalian fetus manake ni mtoto ambaye anakuwa ni yuko ndani ya tumbo la mamake. So mtoto anahitaji kuchukua oxygen toka mamake. A mammalian fetus requires to take oxygen from the mother's or maternal hemoglobin. So there must be a mechanism that a mammalian fetus will take oxygen from her mother, and the mechanism behind it that the mammalian fetus contain a hemoglobin which is higher affinity of oxygen as compared with the hemoglobin of the mother. So having the higher affinity for oxygen, that means this hemoglobin, when the blood passes through the placenta, this hemoglobin takes oxygen from the mother's hemoglobin. So it takes oxygen from the mother's hemoglobin and then supplies it to the fetus. So if it takes oxygen from the mother's hemoglobin and it has higher affinity to oxygen as compared with the mother's hemoglobin, that is because of the difference in the chain of hemoglobin. In the maternal blood, we have the alpha and the beta chains of hemoglobin, but in the fetus we have the alpha and the gamma. We don't have beta. So that is just the difference in the chain of hemoglobin, and the mechanism behind it is made by God himself. He decided to do so in order to make the fetus hemoglobin to have higher affinity of oxygen and thus to take oxygen from the mother. Blood at the placenta does not cross. Blood does not cross placenta. Why? Because blood is carrying many things. Some of them they are pathogens, chemicals, bacteria, and some of them they are teratogenic to the children. So we know that if we have higher concentration of those chemicals, they can cross placenta, but if they are at low concentration, they can't cross placenta. So because we don't want all components of blood, of maternal blood, to cross placenta, also even oxygen does not cross placenta as itself, but because of the higher affinity of the higher affinity of the fetus hemoglobin as compared with the maternal hemoglobin, that is the reason behind allows the fetus hemoglobin to take oxygen from the maternal hemoglobin. Now we are saying that not only do respiratory pigments vary between species, there are often different types in some species. For example, in humans, the fetus has a hemoglobin which differ in 2 of the 4 polypeptide chain from the hemoglobin of the adult. As I told you that the fetus has the hemoglobin having 2 alpha chains and 2 gamma chains, but adult having hemoglobin having 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. So that means in the fetus the 2 chains they differ from the parent one. This is the major adaptation shown by oxygen uptake in the fetus. Thus fetus hemoglobin has a higher affinity of oxygen than the maternal ones. This allows fetus hemoglobin to absorb oxygen from the maternal. Allow fetus hemoglobin to absorb oxygen from the maternal hemoglobin at the placenta. So percentage saturation are plotted against pressure show that the oxygen dissociation curve for the fetus hemoglobin is situated to the left of that of the maternal hemoglobin. So this is very important for you to understand, because sometimes when you are asked this question in the exam, you are required also to plot the graph, and the graph your graph must illustrate that the fetus hemoglobin graph is left to that of the mother. And why it is left to that of the mother? The left position of the fetus hemoglobin graph indicates that it has higher affinity for oxygen as compared with the mother's hemoglobin. So this is our graph, and as you can see, this is the comparison of the oxygen dissociation curves of the maternal and the fetus. Here is the percentage saturation of hemoglobin. Here we have 50 and here we have 100, and then here is the oxygen tension. This is the adult hemoglobin, and here is the fetal hemoglobin. So the fetal hemoglobin, it had the S-shaped curve positioned to the left of that of the adult or of that of the mother, indicating that its affinity to oxygen is higher. At the same oxygen concentration of 5, fetus hemoglobin will be able to carry oxygen from the mother's hemoglobin. So fetal hemoglobin has a greater affinity of oxygen than adult hemoglobin to enable it to obtain oxygen from the mother's hemoglobin in the placenta. So this is the adaptation of the fetal hemoglobin and the graphical illustration of how it is adapted. Now let's move to the second group, which are mountain climbers. Mountain climbers are people who are climbing mountains such as Kilimanjaro and other mountains. So we don't talk of the small mountains here, but we are talking of the large mountains, because there the partial pressure of oxygen is different from sea level or from other environments. So the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is the same at high altitudes as it is at sea level, namely 21%. Amount of oxygen is the same. Percentage of oxygen is the same at high altitude or even at low altitude. When we are talking at high altitude, we mean at the higher meters above or at the top of the mountains. Now, the respiratory problem associated with living at high altitudes are the result of the reduction in atmospheric pressure. Amount of oxygen is the same. Percentage of oxygen in the air is the same, but there is a reduction in the atmospheric pressure. So the reduced pressure means that it is more difficult to load hemoglobin with oxygen. It is more difficult to breathe, yani unavuta hewa kwa shida. Ku load hemoglobin with oxygen, to give hemoglobin oxygen, it is very difficult. Above about 6,000 meter, the pressure, above about 600 meter, the pressure, okay, the pressure is inadequate to load hemoglobin effectively. So as we are going higher, percentage of oxygen in air remain the same, but because the atmospheric pressure decreases, now that pressure is insufficient to load hemoglobin with oxygen above 6,000 meters. So the people living in high altitude and mountains, climbers, develop the following adaptations. Now these adaptations, often for people who are living in high altitude, they are developed for a long time. So they have this kind of adaptation as compared with those people who are just climbing mountain for 2 days or 3 days and then they are coming back to live in low altitudes. The first adaptation is the development of the lungs capable of taking large amount of oxygen and for a long time. So that means their lungs are containing more air spaces, thus allow them to take large amount of oxygen, and that oxygen stays for the long time as compared with the normal lungs. This is done by improving capillary network in the lungs and deeper breathing. So huyu mtu anakuwa na a good capillary network na pia hata a breathing mechanism yake anakuwa ana breath deeper, manake jinsi ambavyo anavuta hewa ni tofauti na kama mtu ambaye anaishi kwenye low altitude ambavyo anakuwa anavuta hewa. So that's the first adaptation of the mountain climbers. The second adaptation, the body cell develop ability to respire in low oxygen content and they become partially anaerobic. You know, in normal human being which or who are living in low altitudes, the cells they adapted or they are normally respiring aerobically. And if the anaerobic respiration starts, that means there will be production of lactic acid, and thus can lead to muscle cramp and things like that. But in these people living in high altitude, their cells they have been adapted or they have been experiencing a long time of respiring anaerobically or respiring at low oxygen content. So they have experienced such situation, and they are normally living in such kind of environment. Third, there is the improved transport of oxygen to the tissue. Improved transport of oxygen to the tissue, and this is the result of the about two mechanisms. How do we improve transport of oxygen? First, it is by increase the red blood cell concentration. This may rise 45 to 60% of the total blood volume. We call this as hematocrit. Kwa hapo tunaongeza hematocrit of the blood, and then we have increased the hemoglobin concentration in the red blood cell. So we may increase by 20%. So first we increase the number of red blood cell, and then we increase the concentration of hemoglobin in the red blood cell. So by that way we increase the mechanism of transporting oxygen to the peripheral tissues. Also we have changes in hemoglobin affinity for oxygen. Changes in hemoglobin affinity for oxygen. So oxygen dissociation curve will be shifted to the left, indicating that the hemoglobin will be shifted. The oxygen dissociation curve will be shifted to the right to facilitate oxygen release of the oxygen to the tissues. Above 3,500 meters. This advantage is often by the reduced affinity of oxygen to the tissue. So above 350, this is an advantage is offset by reduced in the lungs, and is not shown by those living at these altitudes, where a shift to the left favors survival. Go shift to the left inatokea kwa ambao wanaishi above 3,500. Kwa nini? Kwa sababu shift to the left itasaidia kukamata oxygen by hemoglobin. Lakini kwa wanao live chini ya 3,500 lakini high altitude, yenyewe inatokea shift to the right in order to release oxygen. Kwa wale wanao live above 3,500, ikitokea shift to the right, that means oxygen itakuwa released na itakuwa very difficult for hemoglobin to bind oxygen. Kwa wale wanaoishi zaidi ya 3,500 inatokea shift to the left, not to the right. And then we have increased myoglobin level in the muscle. Myoglobin tutaenda kuidiscuss hapo baadaye. It is the pigment like hemoglobin, and its function is to store oxygen in the muscles. So they are increasing myoglobin level in the muscles, so that because myoglobin it is used when body it is deficient with oxygen. Body ikiwa imekosa kabisa oxygen, myoglobin now it is used. So we are increasing the level of myoglobin in the blood, myoglobin I mean in the muscles, so that if the body is deprived of oxygen at all, we are using the oxygen which is stored in form of myoglobin. And then we have adjustment of the blood pH. Adjustment of the blood pH, that is the reduction loading of the hemoglobin leads to the deeper breathing, hyperventilation, in an attempt to compensate for the lack of oxygen in the blood. This leads to the excessive removal of carbon dioxide and raise the blood pH. So we have different mechanisms to maintain the blood pH, and we have different mechanisms to maintain the rate of ventilation. But what we are saying, For example, if the concentration of oxygen is increased in the blood, that means the number of hydrogen ions produced in the blood will be high and the pH of the blood will be decreased. So the blood will be more acidic. But when the blood passes through the receptors present in the blood passes through the receptors present in the aorta, the receptors will sense the increased concentration of hydrogen ions, indicating the increase in concentration of carbon dioxide. So thus will go to affect the mechanism of ventilation and the pumping of the heart, the rate of pumping of the heart. So all of these, the adaptations which can occur even in the mountain climbers. So the reduced loading of hemoglobin leads to the deeper breathing, hyperventilation in attempt to compensate for the lack of oxygen in the blood. This leads to the excessive removal of carbon dioxide and a raised blood pH. Nervous responses are triggered, causing reduced depth of breathing, undesirable in the circumstances. So these processes, they are regulated. If the concentration of carbon dioxide is increased, that means there is a deeper breathing which will remove carbon dioxide. But if it is again reduced more, then the rate of breathing it is regulated again to normal, so that the blood pH will not fall to the level which is fat. So unaweza kuona tu kwamba tumediscuss point ni kama chache, lakini they are many, so you need to understand them. Actually, by cramming they are many, and by cramming it will be very difficult for you. You need to understand about the mechanism of increasing transport by increasing red blood cell, and then change hemoglobin, increase myoglobin, changing the ventilation rate and things like that. So we are continuing with the adaptation of the mountain climbers. However, for them, I think that was the last adaptation. So in a acclimatized or adapted individual, the hydrogen carbonate ions are removed by kidney, restoring blood pH to normal. So in people who are adapted to live in mountain regions, the hydrogen carbonate ions, they can be removed even by kidney, and thus they bring back the pH of the blood to normal. So this is not usual in all humans, but only in those people living in high altitudes. So now let's move to the adaptation of the divers. Divers ni waogeleaji. So waogeleaji, because they are going down and they are down, that means pressure is different. Kama tulivyosema kwamba tunavyoenda juu, the pressure atmospheric pressure tend to be low. So if the atmospheric pressure tend to be low, that means tatakiwa mtu afanye fighting ili aweze maintain oxygen. Also, when you are going down into water, atmospheric pressure also tend to change. So the adaptive features for oxygen uptake possessed by diving mammals include the following. First, the lungs are so large that the amount of oxygen can be taken into oxygenated blood and full as possible before diving. That's the first adaptation. Now, this adaptation, it is similar to the mountain climbers, increasing the capacity of lungs to carry oxygen. But second, those is increased blood volume, so that large amount of oxygen can be loaded into the blood. So these there is an increased blood volume, so that large amount of oxygen can be loaded into the blood. Unaweza kuona kwamba kwenye mountain climbers the case was at least is different somehow, because there we increased the number of red blood cell, and we increased the hemoglobin concentration in the red blood cell. However, increasing the number of red blood cell and hemoglobin concentration at the end of the day will lead to the increased blood volume. But here was just the amount of oxygen which will be loaded into blood before diving. There in the mountain climbers, we want the mechanism which will develop so that to ensure an animal getting oxygen from environment. Those environment have low oxygen, so we need a mechanism which will ensure the absorption of that low oxygen into the body. But here we need a mechanism which will ensure uptake of high amount of oxygen before diving. So mechanism number 3, once diving begins, most of capillary of the body in most of the non-vital organs shut off, so that blood flow mainly to the brain and the swimming muscles, thus minimizing oxygen consumption of the muscles. So unaweza kuona hizi adaptation zimebase kwenye kuexplain kwamba huyu mamo ameconsume a certain amount of oxygen, au labda huyu mamo kama ni human being amebeba mtungi wa oxygen. Now when he start diving, lazima pale aanze consumption ya oxygen kuipunguza, ili kwamba ile oxygen isiweze kuisha kirahisi. Adaptation number 4, there is an increased tolerance of oxygen depth. Oxygen depth ni we shall study it later in respiration about the concept of oxygen depth. But there is an increased tolerance of oxygen depth, so that tissue can cope with a high concentration of lactic acid without any damage of greater hemoglobin concentration in each red blood cell. Kwa hiyo there is increased tolerance of oxygen depth. Kama inavyosemeka hapo, oxygen depth manake ni kama deni la oxygen, but how it occurs and its mechanism, how it will come to be paid, and those development of lactic acid and things like that, we will discuss them in a part of respiration at the continuation of this topic. Adaptation number 5, greater hemoglobin concentration in each red blood cell is increased compared with the non-diving animals, and increase the number of red blood cells to hold 35% of oxygen and 100% of blood, double the capacity of humans. This adaptation is similar to the mountain climbers. They have increased the hemoglobin and red blood cell concentration. Number 6, reduce the sensitivity of blood pH. Most mammals respond to the decreased pH of blood due to an increase in carbon dioxide concentration by increasing heartbeat and the respiration rate. The effect could be harmful during active and during mammals fail to show this response. So in diving, mammals, they do not show the responses which are shown by other mammals, in order for them to ensure their survival when they are present in water. So divers, they do not show the adaptation as how they are shown by other mammals. And let's go to the next page, so that we are finishing our discussion about the divers, the mechanism or adaptation by which organisms they adapted in different environment to carry oxygen. So let's complete our discussion about the divers. We have the 6 mechanism or adaptation of the divers. They are rich in myoglobin in the muscle, which are responsible for storing of oxygen. We saw this also in the mountain climbers, increase in the amount of myoglobin which will store oxygen. Number 8, reduction of the cardiac muscles. This is only in the divers, not with the mountain climbers. So cardiac muscles, they are muscles of the heart, and we know they are responsible for the pumping of blood to different parts of the body. But cardiac muscles, they are very metabolically active, so they are using a high amount of oxygen. So during diving, cardiac muscles in the heartbeat is reduced, which reduce the amount of blood circulation, and these help much in the conservation of oxygen in the muscles. Also, cardiac muscles, they are consuming oxygen more. So if the number of cardiac muscles would increase, that means even the consumption of oxygen would increase. So reduction of cardiac muscles is important, because we decrease the rate of circulation, thus we conserve oxygen, and also we decrease the usage of oxygen even by the cardiac muscles themselves. Number 9, we have restriction of the blood to vital organs. As we said, the blood capillaries, which are directed to other organs which are not important, they are undergoing vasoconstriction, and then blood it is directed to other tissues which are important. From there, we have reduction of the metabolic rates during diving. Reduction of the metabolic rate. This is the clear point, and it doesn't need any explanation. So it's understood that we reduce the metabolic rate during diving. And from there, we have closure of nostrils. Nostrils ni hizi pua, kwa haya matundu ya pua ndo ambayo yanaitwa nostrils. So closure of nostrils, anatomical modification allow the nostrils to be closed. So this marks the end of our session, and in the next session I will be discussing about the myoglobin and the relationship between carbon monoxide and hemoglobin, carbon monoxide and hemoglobin. So I will discuss many things, but I hope you have enjoyed the session. So this is Dr. Mlelwa Lecturers. If you want to contact me, you can use this number. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, and then to share. If you need these notes, just visit the Kipaji app. Go to Play Store, download the Kipaji app, and then you find for the Dr. Mlelwa Lecturers, respiration, Gaseous exchange, and respiration notes. You will find these notes at the year here. So I hope you've understood the session. If you have not understood, don't forget to drop your comment below and join our Telegram group for more discussion. Thank you everybody, and let me wish you nice studies.